Hello, everyone. For the past 2 weeks, many of you have followed the conflict between Israel and Hamas. In order to help us understand who Israel really is facing and how Hamas in particular operates, I'm particularly happy to welcome Dr. Daphne Richmond Barak, Assistant Professor at the Lauder School of Government, Diplomacy and Strategy at Édition Herzliya, Senior Researcher at the International Institute for Counter-Terrorism, and also affiliated with the Modern War Institute at West Point. Hello, Daphne.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Let's start right out. Maybe just to explain sort of how did the conflict actually started and what was Hamas or what is Hamas looking for?
So this round of conflict could look like it was started by a land dispute over some houses in Jerusalem in an area called in Hebrew Shimon-HaTzadik and otherwise known as chercheur. It's not really what it is because the timing of this operation and the way in which it escalated gradually and systematically in a very controlled and seemingly planned fashion suggests that really this was an excuse. This was a pretext. There was also a settlement, and the Israeli Supreme Court was also involved in settling this land dispute. This was used because of all the symbolism behind it, the lands in Jerusalem belonging to Jews versus those that belong to Arabs, and also creating some legitimacy for further actions of the Hamas. So I don't believe that this was spontaneous. I don't believe that it deteriorated. I believe that it was carefully planned and escalated by the Hamas, which eventually started firing rockets at Israeli territory, first around Jerusalem, but then quickly spreading to the entire country. And that is the point where Israel decided to engage in a military response.
The second question is, can you tell us a little bit about who Hamas is? What is Hamas?
Yeah, so when you watch the pictures of sympathizers with Palestine, Free Palestine, and Hamas all over the world these days, you can easily get the impression that Hamas is a peace-seeking organization trying to establish control over the Gaza Strip. This is not the case, okay? Israel disengaged. Israel left the Gaza Strip, which is occupied, on a unilateral basis, a unilateral move in 2005. So that's almost 16 years ago. This was supposed to bring peace. But instead, what happened is that Hamas established control of the Strip. And Hamas is a terrorist organization. So Hamas, for example, instead of caring for its population under its control in getting them COVID-19 vaccines and helping them, establish schools and universities and health clinics. Instead of that, it used its money and the money that it gets from its donors to create an underground network of proportions that have not been seen until now, in which it can hide and conduct all of its operations undetected from the eye of Israeli intelligence, reconnaissance, and surveillance methods, and using this network to create more weapons, more rockets, to build launching pads that are also located underground, so that Israel cannot know where the rockets are coming from, and essentially equipped with everything that Hamas operatives need to be able to carry out their military enterprise. They have it in their charter that they want to annihilate Israel. So no, this is not a peace-loving organization. And you could perfectly, by the way, support the idea and the concept of a Palestinian state while rejecting the rule of Hamas and the way that it treats its citizens and the kind of practices that it engages and the choices that it makes on a policy basis. There's no contradiction between the two.
So one last question. People here speak a lot, of course, about the issue of proportionality. could you speak to us a little bit about the concept of proportionality and how it applies in the current conflict?
You're absolutely right. It's like the buzzword. Every time there is a conflict involving Israel, especially involving Israel, because you don't hear it as much in a fight, the coalition against ISIS, there was not as much discussion of proportionality. But when it's Israel, suddenly this becomes the one word. This and also war crimes, right? What is actually a disproportionate strike? What is actually a war crime? And this is perhaps the greatest misunderstanding of all. Let me just clarify this for a second. There is a special body of laws, of rules of conduct that apply during a war, and those are called the laws of war. And these laws of war, they take as axiomatic that people, and as tragic as it is, and believe me, I haven't been sleeping for 10 days thinking about it, the tragedy of war is that people will die, people will suffer. So not every single civilian death or every single civilian building that is coming down equals a war crime or means that the strike was disproportionate. For a strike to be disproportionate, the damage caused to civilian and civilian infrastructure needs to be excessive in comparison to the military advantage that the army expects to gain from this particular strike. It means, what is the value of taking down this particular target, and what would it justify from the point of view of civilian life? It is a very uncomfortable conversation to have, and this is why very few people are having it. But the fact is that there could be, under international law, civilian casualties, and such civilian casualties could be perfectly lawful and accepted by the law. Does that mean that, again, it's not a tragedy, that it's not morally wrong, perhaps? That's a different set of concerns, but let's not bring in then international law into the picture, right? Let's be accurate with what we say. Not every casualty is a war crime. Not every casualty is disproportionate. For example, the value for Israel of eliminating an ever-growing and ever-sophisticated underground network of tunnels that are also connected to the cross-border tunnels that Hamas is now threatening to use against Israel in the final blow of the operation. The value of eliminating this network for Israel is huge. And it's maybe even greater than eliminating another 10 or 20 Hamas militants. So how can Israel achieve that while minimizing, but not necessarily eliminating, the harm caused to civilians? That's the big question. And that's what Israel is doing on a regular basis, when military commanders are assisted by the most experienced and the most senior international lawyers who provide advice at every single step of the military operations.
Thank you so much, Daphne, for having taken the time. I know this period is particularly complicated, so really thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me again.